with
Okay. So I
general.
have a client that is trying to do something on on her own, and real simplistically. So she's trying to do something. She worked for a big company that worked in a certain spiritual aspect, let's say. And she's been detached from them for quite some time, but she was a major player in that organization. Whatever happened that they had a falling out or she just wanted to go out on her own, she did. And after this amount of time, which, I can't really say how long it's been, she's decided to do something similar, but in her own way of thinking what's important and what's not important to teach people. So, um, and when she's getting closer and as she was getting closer and closer to establishing that, um, and opening up her own school or that type of thing, um, she didn't just, it wasn't her that was being, accosted, as far as I know. At least she didn't let that on. Whether it's, it must have gotten back to the other people that were in that original organization, two primaries, and they have connections with a lot of other, practitioners that, are quite good at what they do, and they have no compunctions about doing negative things to uh, keep people in compliance or whatever. And it's not a cult or anything like that. It's just a different way of thinking about things. Like they don't find any, these practitioners are completely um, in line in their uh, their ability to be good with what they're doing, even though the outcome might be negative. It would be negative by this person's connotations and by the general, let's say, spiritual community's connotations of what is good or bad. And so these people walk a line. Um, and because they have integrity with the way that they feel about that, um, there's none of this idea of like there's some kind of universal law that says whatever you do to somebody will come back to you or any of that stuff. It's like it only comes back to you when you're not completely in alignment with that. And that sounds very easy, but it's not easy. You either have to grow up with that idea. It has to be a belief system that's really installed in your subconscious and that you've done it many times to reinforce that so that your integrity is intact. And so, you know hence we can't judge everyone by this puppy dog and rainbow idea of most Western practitioners that there's some universal law that says nothing negative can happen. Well, in principle, positive and negative are both things that are, interpretations by each person. So there's nothing universal out there that says, you know, negative things can't exist. I mean, that's just insane, right? When we say it like that, I mean, that's just crazy. It's like it's all just,
Well, not just about like not being able to exist, but more like um negative things don't get squashed by the universe for acting the way that they are, even though our interpretation of it are kind of standard American or modern society moral values would say like, oh, that's a negative thing to do to somebody or whatever. Um, but like, but there's nothing like they're not people or animals or negative things aren't getting squashed for that because within themselves they're in their own integrity.
yeah. I mean, if a shark, do you think a shark, ends up getting some horrible shit if it eats a innocent person in the ocean, or a baby seal or anything else? No, because they're, their integrity is intact. That's what they do, right? They feed on things that look like they're sick, or that they're easily caught, or whatever it is. And it's like there's nothing evil about them, and so there is no retribution that comes back to them. So, and all aspects of nature are like that. And that completely encompasses that as above, so below. So if we look at that and we really take that as sort of a foundational idea, then there isn't anything like that. Where the problem comes in is that most people aren't that clear cut, right? And especially people that learn, let's say, these spiritual techniques or whatever. So if they try to do something negative, there is a part of them, if they grew up with the idea that doing negative things to other people or others or situations, that's not a good thing. Well, as soon as you have that installed as a belief and you do something bad, well, then there's going to be retribution that comes back to you. It's going to balance the scales because that's what you believe. Whether people say they believe it or not doesn't matter. What your words have no, they take a back seat compared to what your belief system actually is. And most people in the world have that belief, so either they have to say, that even if it was some kind of retribution or something, maybe it's even like in our world justified, right? But if they have this idea that doing something negative to somebody is a bad thing, then they're going to get something that balances that back out. So, and for most people, that's the case. But people that are brought up in a culture where that's okay, really okay, and actually is considered good, that, they don't have that, incongruency in their subconscious, right? It's integral, right? Their thoughts, their words, and their deeds are exactly in alignment with their end result that they're looking to achieve. Anyway, long explanation. So,
So the idea is that, well, can you lay out like again, like the idea is that there may be somebody who's acting in that way from an energetic perspective, right? To have an impact on this person.
yeah. And so, and quite intelligently so, I mean, we could call it psychology, but basically it's, their idea, like what would cause, I mean, a lot of people, if they have a strong idea about doing something, you know, um, we even have movie memes around this, right? Where it's like, they don't care, the David and Goliath thing. They don't care how big this other organization is or whatever. And they don't care what kind of threats come down from them, real or imagined. They'll go through things. On the other hand, if it was, if the threat wasn't coming toward us directly, but being directed toward, especially for a mom, like your child, then you have way more to consider, right? And so, and that's the case for this client. And in this case was that it wasn't her that was being, let's say, put under duress, but one of her children. And children, yes, but she's an adult child. So, lots of things befalling her. Now, we can put aside the argument that, because it, like how much of this was initiated, how much of it is perceived by that person, they're also, which is a strong one, is their the word escapes me now, but their cognitive bias that, everything that befalls them, in a negative way is considered part of this, so-called attack or whatever it is, right? Which is brilliant, right? Because I mean, it's like their own, everything kind of gear them in that direction, right?
Yeah, it's
Confirmation
it
bias.
it's funny because when you actually shared with me that you were working on this, thing, and you alluded to it, um, it's funny because for the most part, the typical response that you have when people think that they're being like energetically attacked, right? Or there's like some people might call it like sorcery or something like that, right?
Sure.
Um, the typical response that you have is like for most people, um, that they're labeling something as something that's coming from the outside or something someone else might be doing to them, right? Or having ill intent towards them in a certain aspect or a certain area of their life or whatever.
Sure.
But it's really like themselves, an aspect of themselves getting in their own way, or that within themselves they're not congruent with what it is that they want, so they're tripping themselves up, right? So um I was actually kind of uh not surprised but a little surprised, um that you didn't have that kind of dismissive response to this situation, and that you were like, yeah, well, I'll check it out. And of course, like one of the things that like I would want you to talk about is like, to some degree, I know you
How
probably
did you
can't.
check that out?
How did you check it? Exactly? Yeah,
Well,
because
first of
that's the most
all,
fascinating part of like what it is that you do and like the skills that you've developed. Because like to me, like I've been thinking about it too. Like even peripherally knowing just a bit about what you're doing, it's like that to me is also inspiring because again, it forms an even stronger bridge between the dreaming and physical reality, right? And
yeah,
how those two work, are connected, right?
yeah,
And
yeah,
what can be done there on that side.
right, right. So, yeah, so I mean, the reason that I took it a little bit more to heart is because I know all the players, right? So I know that organization, I know their principles, I know the person, and to be honest, I mean, you know this. I mean, the person that contacted me for help, we weren't always on the best terms, right? I mean, it took a lot for her to actually contact me because, it's like we don't have the same ideas about things. We don't sort of align ourselves in the same way with these types of things. And so that already made me think twice instead of just dismissing it. And again, knowing the other principles as well, except for the child, um, I don't, I know that it's the probability, well, not the probability, the possibility of them doing that is well within the range of what they do, so um, especially if they utilized other players in that, and let's say the way she, you know, um, contacted me and asked me for help, they would have contacted others that they know that are in that territory as well to, to put this out there to make their efforts, either to distance themselves from the whole thing and leave it in somebody's hands that doesn't have any of these functions, right, of good and bad as far as that goes. So it gives them a bit of distance. Although, you know, um, at this point, I know that that's the case, but they also, uh, you know, participated in that. So it's like,
All that you've gathered that from.
yeah, from my initial gathering of information and observation, in the dream, because she's being, even though some things are, I think that the physical, I don't believe, here's generally how it works. It's not so much the way people initially think, right? That somebody is manipulating physical events to bring harm to somebody else, mentally, physically, doesn't matter, right? um, it's more that they accost them on a subconscious level, so that and install these ideas um, on a subconscious level, so that eventually that person, being fearful and on a conscious level, starts to attract these negative events toward themselves. Of course, how much of it is actual, how much of it is like a confirmation bias on their part doesn't matter, right? Because the more even their confirmation bias attributes everything to that energetic attack or that feeling, it just supports it and reinforces it even more. So, we can go from both angles. It doesn't really matter, right? It's like the end result is what's really important. So, yeah. So my first couple of attempts at observing what was going on, because mostly it started and continued with her, having these, horrific dreams about, everything from demons attacking her to, whatever, all kinds of, pretty awful stuff, and recurrent on a regular basis, at night when she would sleep. So she got even more paranoid about sleeping. And so, of course, we know what kind of state we get in when we don't have enough sleep. And, it makes everything even more compounded and even more awful, right? Like decision is foggy, and like you make bad decisions. And, she's had several car accidents in the last, short amount of time, because part of that could be possibly because she's sleep fatigued as well, right? Sleep deficient and all of these things. But it doesn't matter, because everything starts from that core of like in the subconscious, where things just, when you're awake and aware, it plays out. It just keeps playing out. And so that physical event, whether you attracted it to yourself or whether it was something else, it just starts to compound. So basically you're doing it yourself after that initial part is complete, right? If that's done very well, then everything starts to support what you think. And so it becomes this self-fulfilling prophecy, basically. And that's what I saw.
That's pretty that's pretty elegant in a diabolical kind of way.
It
But
is.
it is interesting too, because not only that, like it also points to the reality of like how we do things to ourselves, right? Those seeds of things that we have in our subconscious that are incongruent with the things that we want, or the direction that we might want our life to move in, right? It's like those seeds are these little kernels of things that grow from the inside out on that
Right.
level. And then, like but then
Until they
becomes
finally produce fruit, right?
right through
Which we
this, like,
reap, right?
yeah, right,
It's like
right.
if you, I mean, a fruit tree is the very best example of that, from a, as a metaphorical way of doing that, right? You take a tiny seed, an apple seed or whatever, you drop it in the ground, it produces over time, a small thing, but everything that compounds it is like fertilizer and care for that tree to produce more and more and to become full grown, finally produce blossoms, finally produce fruit. And when the fruit is ripe, it falls, right? It's just that in our way, my way of imagining that, which isn't my way, it's something I was taught, I want to be really clear about that. That these, um, the fruits, they fall into, it's not just a, something in our subconscious at that point. The fruits, the physical manifestation of that, the essence of that seed, you know, those things fall into our physical reality. That's sort of like such a concentrated, it's like we don't eat the blossoms. We don't eat the leaves. We don't eat the sticks and the stems. We don't eat the roots of the tree, right? We eat the fruit because that's where the concentrated essence of apple is, right? So, and so this is projected into our physical reality too. The fruits that, get heavy, get ripe, and fall from the tree as the ultimate ripeness. When they fall, they're not falling into your subconscious and making more. They're falling into this place and producing a physical effect. That's the theory. The mechanism behind that, I couldn't friggin' tell you, right? That's where everybody gets messed up, right? Because they're always looking for a mechanistic sort of physical action of how, something energetic or something mental can produce a physical effect in our physical environment. And I don't know if we'll, I don't think we'll always be in the dark with that. But at this point, does it matter? Does it really matter how that happens? We know that it does. And then everything that compounds that, every event, and that cognitive bias that puts it in alignment with that thing, that's something that really is sort of like just at that threshold of conscious, level of like producing more of that effect. Because again, kind of like, I hate to use the law of attraction, but it is sort of that idea. You are what you think about most of the time. And if you think you're going to be accosted and that every bad thing is happening from this energetic attack, well, it's it's very difficult to get out of that scenario, right? Because it's just self-perpetuating.
Especially when things start happening.
And especially if a little, right? It's like enough to really, to be, enough to hurt yourself, basically. It's like that, you have a certain, even if you're not completely involved, you have a certain amount of understanding that you think, cursory level, you even, consciously believe that can be true, right? It's like those things all support that and make it stronger and stronger, right? So yeah, so then that's lots of background. Don't know if
Yeah,
you need all
that's no, it's good.
that. So then once I, observe that to be the case,
And again, that's something that, like, I'm just gonna scratch the surface and then you can tell me how far you want to go with that. But basically, you're entering a lucid dream and you're doing that from the waking state. Like you're consciously inducing a lucid dream from a waking state, right?
right,
Entering a lucid dream, and then from that place, you're choosing where to go, right? To
yeah,
And how does that work?
I'm I've gotten enough information from mom to be able to, and the daughter too. We've been in slight contact. I tend to work more, uh, to remain for me. It's like I don't do all this, ridiculous. Like you need your permission, you need this, you need that. If I got the permission from the mom, then I got the permission, right? I mean, and I did get permission from her as well, but it's not. I don't this whole idea of having close contact and getting all, like, back and forth and how are you doing and all this. I just don't do that. I feel the less I have that type of contact, the more objective I am, and I can do the work without, getting all involved in that, you know. Um, so yeah. But I had enough information to be able to track down the specific person. Like I know where she lives, I know when she was born, I know her full name, I know, I have a number of things that I can, utilize to um, to find her in her dreams, and and be on the outside looking, or be in it, but sort of be in the periphery observing what's happening to her in those territories. So once the first time I did that, everything was fine. I could see not only, the manifestations that were happening to her in that dream state, right? And she's unconscious, she's not lucid. So, it's real to her, right? I mean, it really is. I mean, to her in that normal dream state, everything that happens in the dream feels absolutely real, right? Um, so being able to observe that from, let's say, as part of her dream, but in the sideline, and being lucid, then I could see, I could look through that and see where it was coming from, so that I knew, who I was dealing with, or what I was
How?
dealing with.
How did that, I mean, I don't know if you can describe that, but like, how does that work from a perceptual standpoint?
Sure. And again, for me, these are my own um, representations of that, how my mind sees it when I'm there, so that, anybody could establish something different. They may see it in a different way, or they may have the same. It's just, it's a way that you frame it that makes sense to you, right? So for me, I see them as, you know, uh, sort of dark black, basically tendrils that are embedded in the person, through their field or on their field, and then tracing back to the
Their
or
energy field.
yeah, and then those tendrils go, outward, and attach to their origin, right, wherever that is, and they attach to different areas. She had um, one in each kidney area, um, um, one in each kidney area, and her womb, and heart, and head. So, um, and the kidneys and the womb came from one person, the heart came from another person, and the head came from another. So, um,
That's kind of a lot. That
yeah,
seems a
it's
little
kind of a
bit like,
lot. It's a
seems like
concerted effort,
seems like overkill almost.
You would think, yeah. And pretty, I
Eh,
mean, pretty elegant as far as, like,
and when that's happening, like when somebody's producing that kind of energy toward another person, let's say on that subconscious level, right? Um, is that, do they have to be, do, like, let's say you said there are three different sources to that energy that are coming to that one person
yep.
to produce this negative response, right? Do those people have to be in, like, generating that effect for that person, like on a regular basis to maintain the that effect that they're producing for them, like, or are they utilizing something else to have that happen all the time?
Right. So, yeah, two different things with that. So, the one that's attached to the heart, and from the one person, the one that was attached to the kidneys and the womb from the other person, those two people, um, if they're aware of it, they're not using a way to keep themselves separate from that. They have to kind of keep it there, so to speak. I mean, it's coming from them. It's not being fueled by anything else. The one in the head, that one, they're a bit more skilled, so they know how to take that away from themselves and attach it to some other source, so that it can be continuous without them having to, like, drain themselves, or um, be connected to it, because they're doing that for numbers of people, so it's like their other work in their own country, so um and so if they were to do that, I mean, they would just, if they had to be attached to it all the time, they'd never be able to coordinate all that, or it would drain them in a way, so it's too much. So
And from what you gathered, is the work being done, is it are for those three others, are they doing that work through dreaming as well?
no,
They're doing are any of the three doing it from the dreaming side?
I don't
They're
believe so.
they're all doing it from the physical side, but with their intent or
Yep.
whatever.
Yep.
But you are perceiving it on a, you know, on that dreaming territory, right? Like
Right.
directly in that person's subconscious.
Right. Right. Yeah. So um yeah, so then it's like, how do what's the approach you're going to take? Because I always hear, I've heard for years about, people just having direct confrontations and all of that kind of stuff, which I always found to be a little silly, because it's like, why? You know, usually you know, it's enough to, for the most part, it's enough to take care of the situation, and leave it in something that's much stronger hands, to say, like, basically, not again, no more. It's like, that's not going to happen. So that's always my first step, because it's like, why why get into one of these pissing contests? There's no reason to do it. It's like, I don't have anything to prove. I don't need to prove my strength against anybody else's or whatever. It's like, I don't need to incur bad feelings or wrath or anything else. Better for them to just know that they can't do that anymore. That it's, this person becomes unassailable in that case.
And how will they perceive that from, how do you think they'll perceive that from their end? Like what will the feedback to them be that will give them that indication that that person is no longer
Available.
to that kind of attack or whatever after you doing what you're going to do?
Yeah. Well, that was the thing.
Like, do you even know how they will know that? Or will they just keep doing what they're doing unaware that it's not having the effect that they want? Because, or do you think that these people have the sensitivity to know that what they're doing, or like how's this going to play out, in your mind?
Yeah. I mean, and again, it's like, mm, for myself, like this, it's an evolution of the way that I do this, right? So it's like, in the beginning, I probably would have, pit myself against whatever, because I was young and stupid, and, didn't care about going back a number of times and like stretching my energetic muscles in that direction, but it's, that's a youthful idea, that you find after a while just doesn't make any sense, to do that. um, so how will they feel it? Well, they'll feel the loss. First of all, they'll feel the loss of that, that energy being clipped off, so to speak, that those attachments being clipped off. And then so, and guaranteed, normally, I would have just left it at that, and they would have, and at least, uh, in this case, I think all three of them will probably try to reestablish that connection, right? And um, so in the past, I would have had to keep going back and doing that. So, um, so Oh, the second stage for me is um, to sort of add a little something to that tether going back to them, not in a malicious way, in the most subtle way that I can, that they'll, you know, forget why they were doing that to begin with. So it'll become something that by the time they check in again with like, oh, what happened with this or what happened with that, they'll be like, it'll already be an extended period of time where that hasn't been attached. So I don't think that that will be enough. So, but it gives her a break, and gives me time for the second stage, which is to, um, clear any other residue that might be there, which isn't much, and then to establish.
And by residue, you mean like kind of almost a healing work
Yeah,
to kind of
exactly.
bring things back into balance from any.
For her. Yep.
Yep. Yeah.
And then the last stage, which is to set up, a connection for her that will be perpetual for as long as, I've established that timing, which is, for her, it's going to be to the end of her life, basically. And that, and then to, because I really feel like the more experienced of the practitioners will try to re-engage, because in that culture they very much are okay with the whole, confrontation by another person type of thing, so they don't mind feeling that out or going through with those things. So, setting up what I guess would be considered, protection around the girl and something that will, internally, manifest as something that can't be overcome, and attaching that not to myself, but to something that's far greater and, and can't be overcome, really. So,
How do you know that, or how, like, because like how, what can you say about how that works and why whatever it is that you're doing, you feel is positioned that much stronger or higher than the energetic work that they're doing? Like, why?
because I'm not doing it on my own. I've made those relationships for myself, and with these, you know, what do we call it? What's a good generic term? I don't know. Energies that are, that are much more complete, and if not complete in what they do, and at a much on a level that that you know at least humans in a human form aren't going to be able to achieve. So I mean, it's not 100% in that, if this other practitioner was uh, highly skilled in that area, they may have acquired, you know, similar, let's say, um, you know, affinities with other sources like them, but it's not very likely. It's not very likely that, I mean, not that it's that
Why?
I'm special in any way, but they're here's the thing. A lot of practitioners, they get used to um, if you're only dealing with people that don't really know, then you're the ability for you to keep reaching farther and farther and farther and connecting yourself with stronger and stronger aspects of the one, it doesn't really bring itself up that way, right? Like you wouldn't need to do that. Like if you only need if you only need a hammer to build the sheds that you're building, you don't really think, and that's adequate for you, then you're not really motivated to go after, you know, getting an, some kind of nail gun or some bigger hammer, right, to build giant homes or whatever it would be, right? Like there's no motivation for you to do that
But
really.
you were.
Yeah, because I'm just I'm an idiot when it comes to like like I I've always I'm constantly pushing the envelope of what I can actually achieve or experience. So it just seemed like when I first started that, I didn't have that motivational factor, right? It was just more like I'm insatiable when it comes to like experience. I just I'm constantly to this day, I'm still pushing myself. And I've had plenty of bad experiences, if you want to, that I would label bad, and it doesn't seem to deter me. It might deflect me for a little while, but then I'm like, oh, I really shouldn't do this again, but I'm going to try it. So it's like I go back in and I do it again. I'm a stupid, I'm a spiritual honey badger, it's like, it's just like, I don't give a fuck. It's like I'm gonna go and do that, And and so yeah, because I know that there's always more, right? So why would I stop at a certain territory if I can, you know, um, analyze and experience these other things, then why wouldn't I? Like I don't have that concept in my core that like, okay, that's enough. I don't need to do this anymore. I don't need to, it's like, I'm like a horrible cat, it's like, man, I'm so curious and I'm so curious about the experiences and how much more in depth I can go and yeah, I mean, you know, how far in, how far out, how far, like, what is the, what is the actual potential of a human? It's like, what can you do? I'm just fascinated by that.
I mean, I think
I
that's a
think it's
good.
the driving force in my whole being.
Yeah. But I think it's also, I mean, it's interesting that you mentioned that too, because I think even the first part of what we talked about, where you're saying, like, oh, I'm going into a lucid dreaming state from a waking state, then I'm navigating to, because I have enough information about this person that I've been given by them, able to go into their dream to then observe what's going on. Like, even that, like, most people would probably listen to that and be like, bullshit. Like
Yeah,
you're just in total fantasy land,
yeah.
which is great because, like, who
I
cares?
don't care.
But
That's the less people that do it, the less chatter and noise is out there as far as I'm concerned. It's like the less disturbances. It's like use the
but
old Yoda thing. It's like less disturbance in the force. It's like it just makes it cleaner for me if I don't have, because there is a certain amount of disturbance that happens from everybody trying to, or not everybody, but lots of people, you know, walking a spiritual path or doing this and that. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that, just noise that's out there that you have to insulate yourself from, and that takes a little extra work, right? And so, um, yeah. So on a whole, it's nothing, in the biggest scale, right? The everything, it's, humans are nothing, but it's like, but in the, just another grain of sand in the universe, right? But it's like, but it's, but still within our realm, if we want to call it that, what we can imagine, what we can explore. Um, it does create a bit of, it's not insurmountable, but it does create a bit of dissonance, let's say, you know.
even on that level. Like
Uh,
like we're talking
Prior to
about
getting to that level,
prior to getting to what level?
to the
In
subconscious, if you
your
want to call it that.
subconscious.
Yeah, or
Like
anybody else's, it's like once you're in your subconscious, there's very little disturbance, as far as like no random noise or
so are you talking about like there's random noise or disturbance or whatever between in the bridge between your conscious mind and getting into your subconscious mind?
yeah,
It's
yeah,
almost like that in between space
that's
is
what we call that the veil, right? The veil is, for most people, is very thick, but it's, what is it? It's energetic noise that occupies that space. That's what makes the transition from conscious to subconscious so, you know, difficult, basically. You have to create a certain amount in the beginning. You're creating a certain amount of, you know, clearing from this side forward, which is the most difficult thing to do, to be honest with you. It's
what do
like,
you mean? What
you
kind
know,
of clearing from this side forward meaning what? Like being
like from
able
the
to
conscious mind, like using um things like things like tumo or burning meditation and things of that nature to help clear, that residue, in your own consciousness, to be able to clear that out energetically, so that um you make that transition a hell of a lot easier. It's less, there's less dissonance to get through, so at that point. And then you work it from the other side, right? I mean, that's kind of technical for the, you know it
right.
doesn't pertain to this conversation, but then you're working both sides to the middle to get that veil more and more gossamer thin, basically, if you can, you know
And you've done that to the point where like
the
it's
transition isn't very difficult for me.
it's just something that you walk through basically whenever you want at any like yeah.
Yeah, at least at this point, it's still, I mean, I still need to go into the, lucid dream state to transition that, but I'm hoping at some point, at some day, if I keep alive and I keep working and I keep doing my practice, that, I'll be able to do that at any given moment, to be able to traverse back and forth easily, from 1 minute to the next. So, which is, in my way of thinking, that's one of those ultimate goals.
Mm, cool.
Yeah. So then, like once you make that connection with something that is not, well, let's not say not connected, but, only connected in periphery to you, but it's, it is an energetic aspect in and of itself, right? And let's say much closer to the one than let's say most human beings. Um,
And just as a reference point, like is what you're describing something that we teach right now in the program or not?
I mean, to some degree, on a cursory level, yeah, yeah, for sure.
Like
I mean, all of the things that we've taught so far are all the elements that you would have to work at and maneuver through and refine over time to be able to bring yourself to the same idea, and to experience it for yourself, right? That's the most important thing. It's not the way that, you don't have to copy exactly what I do. The idea is that you'll experience it for yourself, and your interpretation of it, um, the imagery, the sound, all of your senses coming online will represent it to you in a way that is specific to you, right?
and what you're talking about right now is the dreaming aspect, getting into
Yeah.
the dream. And I meant also like the part where you're saying like um the contact or connection you have with something greater that's, you know,
Yep.
for the purposes of protecting this person or whatever. Like
Yep.
that's something that we go over in the program, right?
We have gone over it on a very cursory level,
Right.
but
Okay.
yeah,
Yes. Right.
but
But yeah, I was just
that could
wondering
be,
if it
if that's
was,
something that
yeah.
people want, then we can, unfortunately, it might just be I always feel funny about this. Like, do you give people that idea, which, like you said, sounds like so much bullshit or so much hyperbole, right? And then, do you give them that as sort of like an ideal that they can never get to? Or can you represent it in a way that seems possible to them through their experiences of doing those foundational practices, which is the way that I think of it, right? Um, it's sort of not, it's not really a trick. It's like, but the foundational practices alone can give you such benefit in your life that, I mean, I would say that 80% of the people aren't going to want to take it, you know, to this extent or in
Yeah,
this
yeah. I
direction,
guess
right?
that would be my question. It's like I think for most people, probably most people don't want to necessarily be able to or would want to push it as far as being able to do the process that you're describing from
Right.
like because this is I mean you're talking about like basic like energetic combat with like
Yeah.
shamans, like
Yeah.
but to over like a person to try and help them and protect them or whatever. But
Right.
but I guess my question is like um let's say hypothetically this type of thing was happening to like what's happening to her, the person you're doing the work on. Um, if she was if all she had in her toolkit was the things that the foundational practices, let's say that we teach in the program,
Yep.
would she be able to do this for herself effectively, or do you think that this is something that because of the people involved requires a little bit more than another level of like proficiency to overcome that?
It might need a little bit more proficiency to overcome it, but you could definitely, you know, um, you could definitely, uh, help to make yourself a little more unassailable, right? But you would constantly have to be working on that in order to kind of keep up with. And that's my whole thing is like, who can do that? Like if you're just a normal person or even a person that has some cursory understanding because of her mom, basically, and her contact with others like that, that, she may be, you know, like a couple of my kids don't really do much other than the cursory stuff with what I do, right? It's like others are
Right.
more involved, but it's like, so I mean, we have to tangle with that as a person, right? I mean, just because they're your kids doesn't mean they're going to hold everything you value as at the same level of value that you hold them, right? So um and it does take a lot of work, right? So it's like my thing is if these other practitioners are going to uh keep it up or costing, the two that I would consider mediocre, will be, I don't think that they'll have, when they get the backlash of trying to attach, that again, and they get a bit of like, if nothing will happen to them if they don't. If they do, well, then, I'll be setting it up in a way that, you know, there'll be like a kind of a shot across the bow, not from me, even though I initiated it, but from uh, the energy that I set up around, that I connected her with to sort of keep her safe, you know. So they'll feel that, and they would be foolish to try to do that again because it just keeps ramping up more and more, and you're trying to ramp up as a human against something that's inexhaustible. So that's, hopefully they'll just forget. That would be that was my way of being compassionate. Just forget about it. it's okay, you know.
Sorry, I'm just laughing because I know how like when it comes to this stuff, like I can just I kind of know like I can imagine, like what that looks like based on, you know, I don't know how I know you or whatever, how you would kind of under not understate things, but just like very how you very neutrally state things. But like, you know, I don't know. I just
Well,
wouldn't.
because I'm not doing it out of animosity, right? I'm doing it out of, you know, if I was doing it out of animosity, I would sick something on them, you know. And, that's that pissing contest that I was talking about. It's like I don't do that, you know, because it just tends to, it's a ping pong match. Then you're just ramping up and ramping up and ramping up until somebody, you know, until it goes way too far, So um it's not, I don't feel like that's, nobody's learning anything about from that. Not that I'm, you know, anointing myself somebody that needs to teach everybody, but it's just like it's just exhausting to keep doing that,
Mhm.
right? It's like you have to keep checking in, and you got to keep ramping things up, and you got to keep, like, it's like Jesus Christ. Finally, you just get, for me, I know it was finally like I just, you get so frustrated after a while, you just lash out. It's like it's, which, I mean, I guess in some ways, there's some justification there, but it's like, who wants to go through that? I don't have the time for that shit anymore. It's like I don't need to do that anymore.
And
So,
how is it that you've set things up so that they they wouldn't be able to track, uh, you know, track you back the way that you tracked it to them and you knew who it was and how it was working and all that? Like
well,
what?
first of all, they'd have to be able to do that same process, right? They'd have to be able to lucid dream in that way, and or if they have uh an entity or something that could do that for them, could figure out, I'm pretty good at erasing my tracks, as far as that goes. Basically, once that energy would be set up to protect her and I'm disconnected from it, there's no way, I'm not leaving any residue there. I'm not leaving any calling signs. I'm not leaving any, like, ha ha ha, this was me, blah, blah, little note with my signature on it or whatever. It's like, fuck off, whatever. It's like, no. Yeah. So, and um, so there wouldn't be anything for them to track back. I leave the way that I came without any footprints, without any tracks for that, So, um, yeah. So that's pretty much it. So, the real test won't even be, initially that she's okay. The real test will be, like, if the mom goes back to, because she's put her plans for opening that place on hiatus. So if she can, goes back to that and continues with that and follows through with that, then that'll be the real test, right? Because it'll be like, if they get wind of it, and obviously they'll get wind of it because, those communities are pretty small. I mean, there's lots of people that belong to multiple communities of that, and so the word gets around. It's like, you can't hide shit, you can't hide anything. So and if they feel so threatened that she's gonna abscond with a bunch of their people, or that she's teaching stuff that that they're not, and they don't want to, I just never understand that on any level. Like, if people want to leave, they should leave, and go where they feel they're going to get the most benefit, right? Or what they want to learn. I mean, it's like, um, you know, I mean, that's the whole point. It's like,
I
I
honestly
mean, the
like,
other way is almost like a cult, right? It's like, you've got to stay here. You're a this, in this school. You're not in that school, and it's like, they're trying to hoard and keep their people. It's like you can't keep anybody. It's like, I mean, that's just nuts, right?
Mhm.
It's like, and I think that would actually make it worse for them, not better for them. They should evolve and be better, and like, offer more or improve their programs or whatever it is, right? I mean, it's like that's the way that attract more people and keep more people, right? It's like you're constantly evolving and getting better and offering what people want, and that type of thing. It's not by trying to hold on to every little scrap that you get. It's like, doesn't that just never made sense to me, really. This whole idea of
What?
like market share or whatever,
Yeah,
it's
but
like,
why? Where do you think that came? Like, where do you think that attitude came from for you? Do you think was it? Do you think that was because of the way that you were raised, or do you think that came through some of the experiences that you've had in your practice that showed you that that was just not a very good way to be or do things? Or
I mean, I know where it came from originally as an idea.
where?
Well, that scenario of like, you're in this school for life, or you're in the mafia for life, or you're in this, this little clique for life, it was, like in ancient times where certain schools had very specific aspects of, and specialties to some degree, and so and they it's what differentiated them from everyone else. So uh and they wouldn't want those, if anybody else learned of those things, it would negate them having to be part of that clique, right? That school or whatever it is. So they guarded it, like literally, like on pain of death. If you were to leave those places once you've committed and they've taught you their highest level of whatever it is, um, for you to then leave and potentially go someplace else, the idea was that you're going to betray those teachings to these other people. Now they're going to have it, and now this school isn't special anymore. There are two schools that do that. And so it was guarded highly, you know. Um, so, I mean, in some ways, I, think of it like
Uh,
old school IP, right? Intellectual property,
yeah, but I
right?
mean, like from your perspective, like where did the idea come from for you to think that that was, not important or not a value that you wanted to personally hold around the work?
I
And
just never thought of it as being, I mean, when I was younger, I might have, I was involved in a place that where that was, um, to some degree, very small though, to a degree, that that they had that attitude at a certain level. Um, but the initial levels weren't like that, because they just thought most people don't have it was only 2% of the population that could actually acquire or have the discipline to really stick with something for that length of time, to really understand, learn it, and be able to apply it correctly. Information didn't matter if it was physical or mental or energetic, whatever you want to call it, right? But when you get into, higher levels, if you want to call it that, of that, of technique and understanding and how it can be applied, then they got a little bit more, consolidated, with that, and a little more protective of those things. And I understood it on a certain level, but on another level, it just seemed like it it just doesn't make sense to me. If you need to spend X number of years or decades to learn something, and you've learned it, you've apprehended it, meaning that it's in you, it just comes out of you, it's part of your being at that point, then you've put in the work, you've done the job, you've done everything that you need to do. You've jumped through the hoops, you've disciplined yourself, you've learned it. It's you now. It's like, and nobody should have the right to enslave you in any way. So I just feel like that's not right. It's like, I get the integrity of it, I get all of that, but knowing that it would take that long to acquire the ability or the skill level to do that. First of all, how many people have that? Less than 2%. And and I don't know. I just that you're actually going to come across somebody that could actually put these, that would not just understand them, but put themselves through the training and discipline of doing that to get to a level where you could actually apply it, is so rare that, what's the point of, restriction in that territory? We live in a different world than we did back then, so it's, so for me, it's just kind of like, it's holding over the worst of, that old idea when people do that. So I don't do that. I teach whatever I know. If people want to learn it, then they've got to, it's the same thing. I mean, you can attest to this. It's like, I never hand anybody anything. It's like, I put the information on the ground and you have to use your own effort to bend over and pick it up. Right. It's like, it takes your effort to produce,
What do you
a
mean?
result.
What do you mean by that? Like, from your perspective, like, what do you mean by not handing people things, but putting it down in front of them so they can pick it up and utilize it themselves? Like,
Well, people can't, I mean, not that if well, that's that whole idea of, I did see that email. I liked it. I liked the picture most of all, but the whole email was good.
oh, on the last
Yeah,
podcast
on the
email that I
last
sent
one.
out?
And
Yeah.
uh uh but yeah, it's that idea of, and why real practitioners that really know how to do that, why they resist it, unless it's uh
Real practitioners that know how to do what?
be able to pull the veil back for you, to give
Oh,
an apprentice or a student a view of what is there, because they're doubting or they're whatever it is, right? It's like to force them into that scenario. you know the
like the Castaneda thing that we talked
like the
about last time,
Castaneda thing, yeah,
where
where he
he like
slaps him on
slapped
the
him.
shoulder. He
Yeah.
feels like it's a slap on the shoulder. It's a slap in his field, in that territory that references that way, right? So
And his assemblage point is shifted, and he's all of a sudden he's in another
he's in a different
dimension,
perceptual state, right? Like really,
in another
out,
place.
out there compared to where he was, right? And
Yeah.
so, you know, people resist that. I mean, not resist it. Most practitioners that can do that, they're you would be hard pressed for them to really do that to you. So it's like, um because when you tear the veil for somebody else, it's like, the old adage is that you're then responsible for them. And that's a huge responsibility. I mean, you don't get to say no or pass that off to somebody else or leave it on their doorstep or whatever. It's like, that's a that's a that's a big deal. That's a contract in a way. So practitioners that can do that just don't, because they have a hard enough time. At least I have a hard enough time dealing with myself. It's like I don't need to have other people, you know, attached to me in that way. It's like be responsible for them. I mean, I already take on responsibility for all the students anyway, as far as like on that level. I don't need another, huge level on top of that of being, you know, um, responsible for them in that way. How is their mental sanity going to be intact after that? It's like, I mean, it sounds cool and everybody wants it. I wanted it when I was at that level, that stage. And I'm just like, but I understood the logic of it later, why you don't do that. I mean, it's like, as much as you want it, as much as you desire it, to be, you know, thrust into, like people just can't imagine. If you even just took a moment to imagine you're standing or you're sitting and you're on the computer, and just like, let's say you instantly became blind, like no visible light, nothing, like you would freak the fuck out. You wouldn't be like going like, wow, this is interesting. I wonder what this is. I wonder here. Blah, 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 blah. No, no. In your dreams, you wouldn't be like that. You'd be like, what the fuck? I'm blind. It's like, and that's just the absence of one sense, right? Imagine all your senses exploding into like, and you're in a different place from one breath to the next. Do you know what kind of, I mean, people can't even imagine how overwhelming that would fucking be. That's why when people, a lot of times when the first time they actually have, a lucid dream, it only lasts about a second because there's such shock when they know they're dreaming, and wherever they are, whatever the visual is, it doesn't matter. It could be an office. It doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't have to be something fantastical or horrible or anything else. It could be absolutely beautiful. But the first time that happens, people, wake up in bed almost instantly, because that's going through that veil back to your normal consciousness, right? That veil, it becomes a protective layer. It's an insulator for you. It's like you can finally, like, you can tell yourself, oh, that was a dream, or even a lucid dream or whatever, but it's that impression stays with you for so long after that. Imagine having that occur for, like instantaneously, and in a conscious waking level, where it's like everything shifts and changes into a different scenario or whatever. It will literally crack most people's psyche. So because, I mean, it negates everything you've been taught from a child, for the most part, for most people, even people who say they don't believe in, whatever. It's like, it doesn't matter, right? It's like physical reality is physical reality. It's not here. I mean, it's here, right? It's like we, thank God, we can utilize the table. I don't have to write on my lap or whatever, I mean, whatever. All of the physical things that we've grown up with, whatever, it just compounds the idea that for most people, this is all there is. And, they might imagine like when they die and go to heaven, or dying, whatever the belief structure is, but it's so far away for most people that they don't put much sense in it, right? They don't put much stock in it. If you're like, completely thrust into some weird ass environment like that, it's like, it's terrifying for people. Absolutely terrifying. It's like, so, that's why I think, it's a good thing that most conscious practitioners don't do that.
So what do you mean by putting things down so that others can pick them up? Like as a mode of teaching?
Yeah, I think that you have to, if they ask you for help in a certain area, you give them, you give them the information, but I don't give it to them and like, okay, here's a bullet point, step by step, and blah, blah, and explain all of my experiences, or or do it for them, or whatever it is. It's like, if they want to learn it, then they've
But
got
to
to
be
put in
clear,
the
like you
effort to
do,
learn it.
but to be clear, you do demonstrate if there's a technique that needs
Oh,
demonstration
sure.
because it requires
Oh,
physical
absolutely. I
component.
mean, I want them to do the right thing and get off on the right track, right?
Yeah.
But as far as the nuances for themselves, I mean, they have to apply themselves to be able to do those things, right? They have to put in the work, right? It's like, yeah, and you'll find that everyone has a certain affinity for certain things, right? Where it's a little bit more natural for them and doesn't take much effort to do.
This brings me back actually to a question that somebody in our program had about like she said like I wish that she was saying if there was one thing that she wished there would be more of, it would be like you saying giving people more of a framework of expectation for like how long what can I expect to achieve, or how long can I expect that being able to see energy will take, or being able to lucid dream the way that you're describing will take, or is it even possible for me or from where I am or whatever, like that kind of, yeah, I guess like that kind of framework of expectations. I mean, it's just
And
what 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 do you say?
everybody's different. I mean, this is something I get in my clinic every day, right? Like, how long is it going to take for me to get better? It's like, okay, I can give you a relative prognosis, but it's like, but the idea is that everybody's a little bit different. Like, I might be able to help you the first time you're in, it's like, it's not what I tell people, because it's not very often that that happens. I mean, I can help them, yes, but 100% cure in one treatment, that's like not very likely. It does happen once in a while, but it's not very likely. Um, so everybody's different, so it's hard to know, but I give them some basic parameters, let's say, as far as timing goes. Like, I'll usually tell them, you really need to feel that this thing is shifting in any way, within 3 to 5 treatments. It's like, you got to see some improvement, or and I'm not saying I'm going to toss you out the door at that point if you don't have any, but it means I need to adjust the way that I'm thinking about this, um, come at it from a different approach or whatever, to try to get you where you need to be. And that's not an indefinite thing, like, oh, 3 to 5, 3 to 5, 3 to 5, 3 to 5. It's like, no, no. It's like, I give myself, basically, I keep myself to kind of a high standard. I give it basically two attempts like that to sort of think about, reanalyze what's going on with them, and then approach it from one methodology, and then maybe from another one, to see if I can, uh, you know, um, get the solution that they're looking for, right? So, um, but with this stuff, it's extremely individual as well, right? It's like, yeah, we can, you know, you'll find out for yourself where your proclivities lie, right? Like, are you a visual person? It's not just the way people learn, but that has something to do with it. Auditory, wrapped around one sense, is going to be primary compared to the others, right? Most humans are visual. Most. I mean, there's no other sense that's more all encompassing for the way that we maneuver in this world, right?
Also, this is like a little bit different because when you're doing a treatment on somebody, that's you doing an intervention on them,
Right.
right? So that's more like it's more of like a subject object relationship where
Correct.
it's kind of like a done for you process rather than
Yes.
like a
Like
teaching
the thing that we
how to
started
do
out
it.
with. It's like, they can't do it, so they contacted me to do it, right?
Yeah,
So,
very similar. You're doing the actual work.
right,
But
right,
when
right.
it and that you can gauge, but when it comes to you giving somebody the information that they need to practice the things they need to practice to develop the skills they need to develop to be able to do these things, it's like mean, that's super individual because each person has their own structure of motivation,
That's
what's
it.
driving them to do it,
That's
how,
right.
and not just, and literally like it, because it may also not just be how much time they put in, because they may be putting time in, but their time in may be inefficient because of the attitude that they're bringing to it when they're doing it. It's like there's all these like um, subtleties in the actual application of the practices themselves that really dictates, the actual experience that each person has. So,
And that experience will really show them if, I mean, one of the first things that I tell everybody, right? It's like you want the truth more than you want to be right. Right? That's one of the precursors for actually doing any of this work. You want the truth more than you want to be right, which is a really big step for most people, because confirmation bias is extremely high. So it's one of those things that, uh, you know, again, I just was very fortunate that I had teachers that were constantly pointing out where I needed work, not what I did well. What I did well was more like, oh, that was good. What I did bad was like, you need to think about this differently. It's like, like, here's the place where you need to focus your work on, because that's the weak link, or whatever it was, right? And so it's like, but I've continued, even though, I'm not directly under those people's thumb anymore. I mean, I've continued that. That's sort of like the basis of how I go through things. I found for myself anyway, that was a really good um, uh, protocol for teaching. It's like identify the weak spots. When you build those up, right? Your strengths get stronger, right? It's like it's a synergy. It happens together. It's like most people want to avoid that stuff, but it's kind of like I always think of all these things that tie into that. Like when uh, I heard the story, read the story, it was just a little thing, and I'm not into sports, so except to soccer. I really like soccer. But anyway, but I don't like golf. Sorry, golfers. It's just one of my things. And so, but I'd read or heard the story about Tiger Woods that, his long game and whatever was great, but he had a lot of trouble with putting. And so, but instead of shying away from that and just resting on his laurels for his long game, he, just got either some coaching that was like all about that, and you just practice that over and over and over and over and over again until he finally brought it up to the same level as his other game. And that was one of the things that made him great, right? It's like I find that, like, finding those areas of insufficiency and admitting that and just knowing, like, it's not a fault, it's just the way your configuration is at that moment. And can you, you know swallow your self-importance to, press yourself into doing something that's more difficult, to bring it up to the other level of your, natural proclivities. It's like, I mean, I just feel like that's such an important aspect of doing any of this stuff, right? And that's individual for each person, so they really have to have that idea. First of all, I want to know the truth more than I want to be right. And then, once they can identify not just their strengths, because you do want to identify that. You don't want to go into it, like, it just seems like it's an all or nothing society in the West. It's like either I'm a shit or I'm a king. And it's like, you're a combination of both, dude. It's like, don't cut yourself short, but don't praise yourself either, right? It's like, acknowledge what you do well and what you don't do well, and then put your attention on the things that you do not so well and bring them up to a level. And don't you think that that's going to increase your ability to do anything that you're applying yourself to in a better way? So I've just always found that to be the case. And so it really solidified that as a thought process for me and how I train myself. And so I've always sort of pushed, or at least, sort of indicated that to my students as well, right? It's like, that's why it's so important to ask questions about, like, you did this process. Where did you, what did you do well? And, what seemed easy to you, and what part of it seemed hard for you, or you couldn't do it at all, or it was a complete washout, or whatever it is. It's like, okay, let's talk about that and see, maybe you're just thinking about it in the wrong way, or maybe you're assuming things that aren't really true, or, trying to negate things that are absolutely principles, right? It's like, when you have that deeper understanding, then you go back and apply yourself again, you're going to find that those things get a little better, right? And the totality of you gets better over the course of time as well. Your experiences get more rich, right? There's nothing that's really lacking in there. And then you're progressing in a much more balanced way. So, but we're all fingerprints. We all have our, our life history, right, from the time that we were born until now, wherever that is. And and nobody else's experience is identical. It just isn't. We have similarities, but they're not identical. I mean, even your thought process won't be identical, even if somebody had the same experience. It's like, nope. It's, the way that you interpret it and the way that you do things is going to be completely individual for you. So, you have to work with that, not fight against it, right? You need to understand it and find the truth in it, and then work with that raw substrate at that point, and build it into whatever it is that you want. But then we're back to, what do you want, and then why do you want it, right? And so those are the first two tools that we use to dig deeper into those aspects. And and then you're producing your own path, right? Your own way to get from point A to point B. And and then you get a little help from us by showing you the different techniques and the different methodologies to get to that place in the most efficient way, and the most enriching way. It's like every step on this journey should be, enriching to you in the experiential level, right? Even the shit that seems boring, or like, oh, I don't want to do this again because I suck at it. Like, that should be enriching to you too, right? When you press yourself into it, it's like, yeah, I had the discipline to go and do that again. I had the discipline to follow it through, and I learned this about it. And now I'm going to augment it this way. And, and you find your way through it. You use your energy to maneuver around those obstacles, or to incorporate them in a way that will make you stronger, right? So that's the whole idea. I just find the whole thing fascinating and extremely beautiful, to unfold like that. It's like I mean, even for myself, sometimes I'm just, self-deprecating, to the point like, oh, I'm just an idiot cat that can't keep his curiosity down. I just have to keep pushing and doing all that. But it's like, and I do say that half serious, but half in jest, because it's like, look, if you were to own, an original Leonardo da Vinci painting, or Monet, or whatever, no matter how gorgeous it was, and you got to see it hanging in your room every day, and you could just sit there like at a museum and just observe it, and just like find all the intricate beauty that's in there, or whatever, I guarantee you, after a certain amount of time, if that's all you were allowed to look at and see, it would become the bane of your existence after a while, right? I mean, I'm sorry to Monet and to Leonardo and all those guys, but it's like, it would be, right? Because, and for me, that's more what it's like. It's like every time I uncover a new experience, a new layer of depth, it's like a different, unsurpassed beauty for me. I'm enthralled by it. I love it. I immerse myself in it, and I get a lot out of it. And what keeps me going is knowing that every time I uncover something like that that's new, it's going to be even more so that, and I mean, what more? I mean, for me, there isn't anything more that would drive me toward that. There's not an understanding at this point for me that would make me, that would give me even more inspiration to do it. That's enough. I mean, in some ways, I'm kind of an experienced junkie, I guess, I just, I love it. And anything that I can get out of that to, to be able to utilize in my physical existence is, you know, that's great as well. Right. Sometimes it's whole pictures, sometimes it's little nuances, but basically I never come back empty handed. So, you know, so for me, that's what it's all about. And if I can give somebody else some inspiration to experience the same or their own version of that, why would I hold that back? Doesn't make any sense to me, but I'm not going to force feed it to them. That's not right either. Right. It's like, I'm not going to get on a soapbox and shout out to the world, or on the rooftop and shout out to the world, this is what's going on, and you should do the same thing. It's like,
Yeah, I mean, it's so
just
funny because
just
like,
just shoot me if
do,
that's the case. If I ever start that, just like get rid of me.
yeah,
I'm done. I'm
you're
done
like,
here.
yeah, well, I don't see that happening anytime soon. You're like so much the opposite of that, that it's like, I think it requires me to be like, hey,
Yeah, and I don't mind that.
tell me more about that.
Yeah, tell me more
Explain,
about that. That's it.
because I'm like fascinated, you know. So I just, you know, uh, it's inspiring to me. So yeah,
Yeah. Well, good. Anything to keep the ball moving, right?
yeah,
Keep the momentum going.
yeah, yeah,
That's all.
yeah. Cool. All right. Well, if you're okay with this being a podcast, I will publish it.
Sure. If it's something that
I mean, I just think
people
it's
would
in.
be interested in, I mean,
I think a lot
I
of
leave
people
that
would
up
be
to you.
interested. I think a lot of people would be interested in it, fascinated by it, to hear about it, and to use it as not just a source of inspiration, but like, because a lot of things you talk about are not just interesting from like the standpoint of some fantastical story that is cool that somebody could shoot for, be like, oh man, I want to be able to do that. That's inspiring. But also, I just think that there's a lot of the philosophy and way you see things, and comes through even in how you talk about it, which I find very clarifying. Like literally, I didn't mean we joked about it on the call the other night. You were like, well, most of my students hang around for a little while, and Dustin seems to be hanging around for, I don't know, 15, 20 years, a whole lifetime. I don't know. I guess he's just an invalid or whatever, and needs that kind of, constant coddling. you know. But
All in good fun.
yeah, no, totally. But
Yeah,
but yeah, I just like literally even just talking about it with you today is helpful for me. So
good.
anyway, yeah, I think we'll put it out there and see what people have to say about it. But
Yeah,
I'm just glad, I appreciate you sharing like the stuff about your, as much as you can, the details of your work and your experience too. So,
right. Right. Yeah, sure. I mean, I just never think anybody's really interested in that stuff. So it's like, why?
well, I
You know,
guess we'll find out.
we'll find out. Yeah. I mean,
Let us know.
yeah, it's okay.
If people are watching it, email us or can comment or whatever. Tell us if you think that, if you want to give us any feedback, that's cool.
Right.
So,
Right. Yeah. That's,
because I'm curious. I mean, I don't care. I'm gonna ask you about this stuff anyway, either way. So,
well, that's the whole point. It's kind of like a
so
la Joe
it almost
Rogan.
doesn't
I
even
ask people what
matter.
I'm interested in.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So
Either
that's
way,
good.
I'm gonna
That's
do what I
good.
want. So,
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. That's great.
all right, cool. Well, we got to get to work, so I'm gonna end this
Segment.
podcasty section or whatever, and we'll do our other stuff. So,
Sounds good.
see you later.
All right, pal.